welcome to MurderHawg System School. So, this is going to be a dry one, boys. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not going to be super exciting. It might be the most boring video I've ever done. Actually, you know what? No, the CDU video was definitely the most boring video I ever did, so it won't be quite that boring, but it's going to be pretty boring and dry. But this is all really critical information. I'm only going to go over what I think you need to go over to be what you would need to go over to be the best possible MurderHawg pilot you can possibly be. So it's not going to be like a deep dive in the system. I'm not going to talk about every single fuel line in the cross-feed configuration and what an N2 compressor stage is and what exactly the PSI system is when it's fluctuating from an accumulator and shit like that. I'm just going to go over the parts that are going to help you understand and fly in DCS. So, pour a tall one, boys. It's going to be a dry video, but we'll get through this together, and hopefully I'll make it fun with memes and cursing and bourbon and all the things that I normally do. Speaking of bourbon, today we're drinking Oregon Spirit, which is actually recommended to me by Chris Fisher of Invictus Cockpit Systems. When I was there, he's like, yo, you got to pick up this bourbon. And I was in Portland, and I picked it up. So, let's give it a shot. Wow, holy shit. It's actually really good. Damn, dude. It's super sweet. It almost tastes like, what is that? Almost sugary. Strange. Let me go for a second try. That is delicious. Holy cow. It's like a sweet, weedy taste. I gotta compare this to the 17 and the 2 sweet wheat. This is incredible. Cheers to you, Chris Fisher. Thank you for the suggestion. So, like I said, Systems Class, Episode 1. Episode 0, I'm releasing all these videos at the same time, or the first couple at least. Episode 0 is not required watching. It's just me ranting about the A10, autistically, kind of setting the mood, if you will, for these videos. And if you watched it, thanks for watching. If you didn't watch it, fuck you for not watching it. But anyway, this is the first video that's actually educational. Okay, so why is this shit important? Why is it important to go over all the systems of the aircraft? Well, because it matters when you lose your left engine and thus lose your left hydraulic system and you don't know what parts of the aircraft are pertinent to the left hydraulic system. Stuff like that, you know. So like, I'm not going to go over like the PSI of the hydraulic system, but I want to go over what's on the hydraulic system. Stuff like that. You'll understand when I get into it. Trust me. I'm going to go over this as quickly as I can, and it will make sense when I'm done. I spent way too long putting this together, actually. It's a little ridiculous. I'm almost embarrassed about it. But to be honest with you, I fucking love this stuff, man. I eat, sleep, and breathe airplanes, the A10 especially. And so I'm actually quite excited to do this despite the boring nature to some people, especially if you're not a pilot. So how is this different from the 9,348 other DCS beginner guides out there? There's, DCS for Dummies, DCS 0 to Hero, there's Crash Laobi, there's Ralphie Dude, there's a million people out there who've done A10 videos. Well, they don't curse, they don't have memes. Well, some of them don't. And I think they are, some of them, I'm not trying to disparage people here, but they're just like reading off the manual. And I'm here to kind of make it make sense is my plan. Where am I getting all this bullshit? Well, there's this book. Got off eBay. It's great. And this is the actual A10A manual that's been declassified. So I've read these books. This book's pretty much a summary of this book, actually, but this includes a lot more information on the C and is more up to date. I've read Chuck's guide, which I highly recommend. Chuck's guide's awesome. And of course, I've read the DCS flight manual that you can find in the root folder of your DCS installation. And then last but not least, I've talked to plenty of A10 pilots in real life. So I've gleaned a lot of information over my years of bothering and pestering real-life military guys. One last thing before we get started in earnest. There's a little bit of an assumption of knowledge here. I'm not going to talk to you in complete nonstop aviation jargon, but I'm going to assume you know what a PSI is or what an N1 stage of an engine is. And if you don't, maybe look up some basic aviation terms. Or if I start speaking a foreign language to you, just Google what I'm saying. It'll make sense really quick. Or better, ask ChatGPT. God damn, the AI is so fucking crazy. It'll explain it to you. Just be like, hey, explain like I'm fucking stupid. What does PSI mean? And it's amazing. So I'll try and speak in layman's terms as much as I can. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay, welcome to systems class. First thing we're going to go over is the fuel system. You got 4 of them. You've got 2 wing tanks left and right, a forward main and aft main. Now, why is that important? Most fighter jets have their gas stored up all in the wings in several tank cells, and some fighters, specifically like the F-16, the engine would be in the fuselage of the F-16. The gas is all around the engine. Pierre Spree was like, I'm not having none of that shit. I want the fuel tanks to be self-sealing, so they're filled with foam, so when they get shot, they don't leak or explode. And I want that gas not to be surrounding the engines. So just take note of where the fuel cells are actually located. You get shot in the wing, you're not necessarily leaking fuel. Single point refueling. As the A-10 eats its gas, it's going to take from the wing external tanks if you have them first, then the center external tank if you have it, then the wing tanks that are internal, and then the main tanks last of all for balance reasons. Also of note, the A-10 does not carry external fuel tanks into combat. I mean, I guess you can if you're a fucking idiot, but you're not supposed to do that. So these tanks can be filled in any order when air-to-air refueling through switches in the cockpit, which we'll go over later. We're going to apply all the systems knowledge later in the video. And you can send that gas to either engine out of any tank you want at any point in time through fuel switches in the cockpit. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the fuel system. Let's go over electrical next. See, this shit's flying by. It's going by so quick. Basically, here's the complete electronics diagram. Fuck all that shit. All you need to know about the A-10s, you've got AC and DC power. The battery is DC, and the generators on the aircraft are AC. In fact, you know what? Fuck that shit. You don't even need to know that shit. All you need to know is the battery can start the APU. The APU can power the whole aircraft. Either engine by itself can power the whole aircraft. And so if you ever lose an engine, or God help you, both engines, turn on the fucking APU. It's that simple. Literally, right over here, just turn that bitch on whenever you have any kind of damage like that. I'm not going to bother going over the volts of the fucking battery and shit. Fuck all that. You don't need to really know that. That's pretty much all there is to power. Oh, one last point. Any engine or APU, well, the engines will take over the power duties from the APU as soon as one of your engines comes online. And you'll notice that in the cold start. We'll go over that later. Okay, moving right along. Hydraulics. We're actually going to spend a fair, decent amount of time on the hydraulics because the hydraulics are actually probably the most important system in the aircraft as far as complication and stuff you should probably memorize. Like, who gives a fuck about the fucking instrument inverter and the AC and DC essential buses in the A-10? Nah, man. Hydraulics are where you're going to start losing your shit. The power is kind of binary. You have it, you don't have it. It works or it doesn't work. The hydraulics, it's where it starts getting fucking messy. In fact, I'm going to do that one on DCS on the flat screen, so just bear with me a second. Okay, much better. This is a lot more fun now that we're in the cockpit of an A-10. Alright, so where were we? Well, if I could somehow put us in Davis-Monthan, where real A-10 school is, I would, but alas, that's not a map that DCS has modeled. So, real quick, revisiting the fuel system, I just want to point some things out real fast. You can see an overwing fuel panel receptacle here, 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 and here that correspond to the left and right wing tanks and the forward and aft main tanks. So you can gravity refuel the wings if you need to, but there's a single port pressure refueling hose here. Well, when this capsule's open, that can refuel all the tanks at once. But anyway, back to the hydraulic system. So I think, and this is the only thing I'm going to ask you to memorize here, it's really important that you understand what's on the left and right systems. So you should know them cold. It's not a whole lot to memorize. The left hydraulic system has the left rudder, the left elevator, left and right ailerons, and the flaps are all in the left system. Also, the landing gear, extension and retraction, wheel brakes, anti-skid, nose wheel steering, and half of the gun drive. The right system has, the other half of the gun drive, both ailerons, because the ailerons are really fucking important, right elevator, right rudder, speed brakes, slats, which are only right there and there. Also, the auxiliary landing gear extension, which is basically just like dropping the pressure to it. The emergency wheel braking, and its associated accumulators, which we'll talk about that later. And last but not least, air-to-air refueling. So there will be pop quizzes about that later. Memorize these systems. Go back and rewatch this video. Tattoo it into the back of your eyelids. Memorize it, memorize it, memorize it. It's fucking important. The hydraulic systems in the A10 are separated as much as possible. I'll post a picture of the hydraulic systems right here in the video to show you. But they're kept separate as much as possible for the obvious reasons, so that a gunshot or an explosion or some kind of damage that takes out one system doesn't take out both. And if you're wondering why that's important, just look no further than United 232, which was a horrible, horrible accident that killed 2/3 of the people on board, or 1/3 of the people on board, I can't remember which, due to a number 2 engine failure, which took out all 3 hydraulic systems. There's only one part of the aircraft where all 3 hydraulic systems were close together, and when the engine failed, it sheared all 3 systems, and they had no more flight controls. So that fucking sucks. A10, not going to be like that. The flaps in the speed brakes can slipstream retract if you isolate them from their hydraulic system. So that's, you just cut off hydraulic power to them, they'll close on their own. And that's done by these switches here, emergency flap retract and emergency speed brake retract, where if your flaps were down or your speed brakes were open and you lost the hydraulic system, they would freeze in place if not for those switches. So that's what's important about that. Last but certainly not least, your 2 hydraulic gauges are right here. They're really tiny. You may notice if you lose an engine, you still have hydraulic pressure because the pressure is built up and you're only spending it when you use the hydraulic system. But if you use it and it starts to drop and your engine isn't core locked or exploded, you might get a little pressure build back up over time, because so long as that engine is windmilling, actually like these kind of are right now, as long as they're windmilling, it's enough to turn the hydraulic pump because it's geared to the engine and actually rebuild a little bit of pressure. I do wish the A10 sort of had some kind of PTU, which is a power transfer unit, that would allow you to transfer not fluid but pressure between the systems to run them both, but alas, it does not. And the thing's robust enough, I suppose you don't really need them. It'd just be a nice to have kind of thing. So maybe go back and rewatch this part again, because the hydraulics are really, 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 really fucking important. Okay, moving right along. The landing gear. The landing gear retracts forward. You probably knew that, and the reason for that is because if you need to gravity extend them, the slipstream of the wind as you move forward will help them extend into place. The main gear doesn't retract all the way into the wheel nacelle. That's by design, so it can survive, well, less damage in aircraft that has to belly up land. It's really important. In fact, if you do take some damage, have your wingman give you a good ocular pat down and make sure your tires aren't blown. You might be better off landing belly up, depending on how busted your fucking tires are. I was talking before about the anti-skid system. The anti-skid system works by detecting when a wheel becomes locked up and you're just skidding along the ground rudder, and releases the brakes just enough to get that rubber kind of biting into the ground again. And so basically you can hammer on the brakes as hard as you want with the anti-skid system, and it's going to stop you in the least amount of distance possible. And you'll see it down here. When you hammer on the brakes, you'll see them kind of flickering. That's the anti-skid system working. Otherwise, if it was off, it would just lock the wheels and you'd just slide along the ground on melted rubber, which is not the most ideal way to stop an aircraft, or a car for that matter. So, pop quiz. What system powers what hydraulic system powers all of your landing gear, your anti-skid, your braking, and your nose wheel steering? Did you guess left? Then you guessed correctly. However, if you lose your left system and you somehow are in enough shape that you can still land the aircraft, you can pull this right here to switch to emergency braking, and now you've got the right hydraulic accumulator giving you enough pressure to give you 5 full applications of brake. You don't get anti-skid, but you do get 5 full pedal presses of brake, which is probably enough to save your life if you are landing. Okay, flight controls, next system. We're tearing through these guys. 2 elevators, 2 rudders, 2 ailerons, obviously by design. You don't typically see these configurations of tails, not since World War II, but the A10 has it on purpose. So if you lose either one of them, you have another. If you lose either elevator, you have another. If you lose an aileron, you have another. And you can keep flying. All this was done on purpose. In general, generally speaking, loss of a single hydraulic system does not affect feel except for rudder input, which, honestly, how often are you putting rudder input in flight? Honestly, it's kind of fucking rare that you do that. The ailerons are powered by both hydraulic systems, so that's pimp. So if you lose one hydraulic system, you might lose that side of the elevator or the rudder, but you still have both ailerons. It's not going to affect your roll feel. You get automatic turn coordination with the SAS system. We'll talk about that in a second. You do not get any roll trim in manual reversion, and each aileron has 2 trim tabs. I'm sorry, each elevator has 2 trim tabs. You can see them right here. So that's pretty much it for the flight controls. They're pretty basic, honestly. Stability augmentation system. That is this shit right here. Stability augmentation system. What that does, basically, is it provides damping, target tracking, it helps with yaw trim, it gives you turn coordination, it gives you all of that shit. Losing a hydraulic system won't necessarily kick it off, which is nice. And you get an emergency disconnect for it down here. This lever that's actually on the control shaft column of the A10 will disconnect your stability augmentation system. They're actually magnetic switches, and you can test them by clicking that. The most important thing the stability augmentation system does, though, is when you go to gun arm and you put it into pack, what it does is the first stage of the gun trigger now slows down your control inputs to help you make finer control inputs to line up your pipper on the target. Then the second stage automatically compensates for recoil. When you pull the trigger, it pitches the aircraft's nose down on purpose to concentrate the rounds around the pipper and help you line up a more accurate shot, which is not always desirable. You can actually click it down into armed, which turns off the pack, and then the gun just fires the way it just fires. And the recoil will pitch the aircraft's nose up, and it won't be so concentrated. But if you're trying to hose down a battalion of fleeing infantry or walk those gun rounds up a column of trucks, I mean, it's not such a bad idea. All right, now we're going to get into the crazy shit. The manual reversion flight control system. You can land in it, but they don't recommend it. The manual reversion flight control system is primarily designed to get you to a safe place to eject. But if conditions are ideal, you can technically land in it, and it has been done. It has saved a couple people's lives. Pitch and yaw is automatic. So say you were to lose all of your hydraulic systems, but you still somehow have your engines, your pitch and your yaw will automatically go to manual reversion, and they actually come back too, which is nice. If you were to somehow get your hydraulic pressure back, they'll go right back into pressurized control again. However, your ailerons will not automatically revert to manual reversion. You actually have to click that over to manual reversion right here. And what that does is makes your ailerons, they'll slipstream, and you'll control the trim tabs on the ailerons only to give you a little bit of roll control. It's not great. Again, it's only so you can get to a safe place to eject. Unless you really think you're fucking swinging your dick around and you think you can land like that. I mean, maybe you can. Hey, you know what? I'll try it. I'll try it later in the video and we'll see. Or in a subsequent video. We'll give it a shot. There's one more thing in the book here called aileron float up, that when you lose your ailerons, they kind of drift to an upward position. I don't know if DCS has that modeled. Maybe I'll do a test later and see if that happens. They just kind of like drift to a position that can cause, it happens over 4 seconds, and it can cause the nose to either abruptly pitch up or pitch down until it's done. I'm not sure if that's modeled. We'll have to take a look later. The flaps. Right now you can see them in the full down position. You have a gauge over here. Why do you have a flap gauge instead of just this is maneuver flaps and this is full flaps? Well, that's because maneuver is 7 degrees and full flaps is 20 degrees. They are limited to 190 knots. They retract automatically if you pass 190 knots. If you lose so if you're at 20 degrees full flaps, you lose hydraulics, they retract to 15 degrees. They'll go to 0 if you emergency retract them. And so here's why there's a gauge telling you exactly where your flaps are at. Because if there is a hydraulic cutoff or hydraulic pressure holds them at 0 or holds them at landing limit, but if you put them to maneuver, there's nothing actually holding them in position. There's no hydraulic pressure holding them in position. So what fucking happens is they get to the maneuver position and then they cut off. They just, bloop, they're done. And they sit there, and then they start to droop with gravity. So it's actually common practice for A-10 pilots to cycle their flaps right before takeoff to make sure they're actually at the maneuver setting, but the gauge will help you determine that. Now, I don't know if DCS has that modeled. You know what? Let's find out. Let's find out if DCS has that modeled. Let's give it a test right now. Let's do it. Turns out DCS does not have that modeled, and we're still... I did the rest of the fucking video and realized I didn't press record. So I need to go back and re-record the last half of this video. Fuck me. I need a fucking another glass of bourbon. Jesus Christ. Okay. So, flap creep, not a thing. Alright, slats. Slats are totally automatic. They're right here. They just help with airflow into the engine. That's all they do. You don't even need to fucking worry about them. They're on the... Which hydraulic system? Did you say right?
Then you are correct.
Speed brakes. So speed brakes are something really, really fucking cool I learned is that if you open your speed brakes only slightly, you get actual an increased roll rate. The A10 rolls quicker. And I tested this, and it is true. It's actually true. So DCS does model that. It's really cool. The speed brake gauge in the A10 is right here. Look out your fucking wing and look at the fucking speed brakes. There is no gauge. Just look at them. Look at them, bro. Shoulder check. There you go. That's it. That's your speed brake gauge. They take about 3 seconds to open and close in flight. They only go to 80% in flight. You get your last 20% to go to 100% on the ground. You get that with weight on wheels when the A10 detects it's on the ground. And they won't hold less than 10% position in flight. They will automatically close because they assume you want them all the way closed if you have that little deployed. They do have speed limits too. There are actual structural speed limits to speed brakes, but you don't got to worry about them because if you're going too fast, they close automatically to prevent structural damage. So don't worry about overspeeding your speed brakes. Now, moving right along. The engine. Engines are TF34s. They're derated CRJ engines. They're pretty anemic. They're not great. If you lose an engine, if it shuts down for whatever reason, you will possibly risk core locking them. Now, core lock is when you have thermal shock, where the engine core is very, very, very hot, and the rest of it is cold. And when it shuts down, suddenly the cold parts seize the hot parts, and the tolerances are not enough to let the engine windmill. And so even though you're trying to restart it, it might not restart because it's core locked like that. So if you lose an engine and it is possible to restart it, you might have to wait a couple minutes before you can actually get the fucking thing to go. You can cross-bleed start your engines. You need 85% core RPM from the operating engine to cross-bleed. If you don't know what a cross-bleed is, Google it. But why you would do that when you have an APU, I have no fucking idea. Fire extinguisher. You have 2 of them. They are actuated with this switch right here, left and right. Either bottle can go to either engine or both bottles to one engine or APU. And in order to discharge a bottle to that engine, you pull the handle and you hit the switch to discharge that engine. Fire detection is temperature sensitive, and if the lights are on, it detects a fire. If the lights are gone, the fire is out. Interesting to note, though, is that the fire bottles only discharge into the seal of the engine, the nacelle of the engine. They don't actually discharge into the core. So if your core is on fire, that fucking sucks for you, bro. That fire is probably not going out. However, if you pull the fire handle, you're going to cut off fuel, you're going to cut off hydraulic, you're going to cut off bleed, you're going to cut off hydraulic, fuel, bleed, and electric to the engine, such that the engine's completely cut off from the systems of the aircraft, and that engine can burn all at once. Why? Because there's no fucking fuel around it, unlike other fighter jets. F-16. Excuse me. Some bourbon to wet my whistle here. So you don't have to worry about that. Another genes designed by Spray. Alright. APU. Located between the 2 engines. There's the air intake for it. The exhaust is right there. The APU is... The APU may be started up to 15,000 feet. Well, it's guaranteed to start at 15,000 feet. You might get an APU start as high as 20,000 feet. It can be used to restart an engine up to 10,000 feet, and if anything happens to it on the ground, like it is damaged or overspeeds or catches fire, it will shut down automatically on the ground, but not in flight. If you lose your APU on the ground, though, chances are something shot you, and that fucking sucks for you, bro. So you're probably ejecting or getting a new aircraft. And that is it for aircraft systems. So let's now take an autistic deep dive into all of the panels and hopefully apply some of that systems knowledge we just talked about. Man, I need to take a break after that one. Thanks for sticking with me. If you're still watching my video at this point, you haven't already shut it off and gone on to watch porn or something like that. God bless you for sticking with me, man. Go pour yourself another glass of bourbon. You deserve it. Okay, let's do it. Starting with the left rear, you've got your test button for the G-Suit. You're in a simulator. You're not wearing a G-Suit. This is actually the Have Quick radio system. If you don't know what Have Quick is a classified radio system that, from what I understand of what's publicly available about it, automatically switches your radio based on a cipher from frequency to frequency to frequency, and all the aircraft are synced up. So all the aircraft on the Have Quick system are hearing each other just fine because all their aircraft are switching frequencies automatically. But if you're trying to listen in and spy on the radio chatter, all you're going to hear is you're going to hear just bits and pieces of what they're saying, and it's not going to make any fucking sense to you. Pretty genius system, actually. I assume the cipher changes day by day. Just north of that, you've got your VHF radio, which you've got off, transmit, receive, and direction finder, which direction finder is used for ADF or ADB, NDB ADF radio nav aids, which, God, I haven't touched those since instrument training way back in 2009. Basically nobody uses those anymore, but overseas they're still popular, I suppose. Volumes here, and then the selector switch, you've got emergency FM, which transmits on 121.5. And you've got the AM frequency, the emergency AM frequency as well. I don't know what that even is. Then you've got manual, which is just whatever you have dialed in there. And then you've got pre-select channel choices as well. Honestly, this thing's starting to rust from disuse because of the ARC 210, but we'll get to that in a minute. Coming over here, you've got an EG Have Quick time of day switch, which is not functional because, again, it's related to a classified system that DCS doesn't model. You've got a UHF antenna control switch, which I assume switches which antenna you're using. I don't think that's modeled as well. The IFF antenna switch, I don't think that's modeled as well either. And then these are the volumes for your stall and your peak performance tones, the doo and the doo when you're actually flying the aircraft. We'll get into that in the next lesson. Fun stuff. Oh, yes, I almost forgot. The most important switch of all. Back here is the ground arm safety, so that you can actually arm all your weapons on the ground, obviously. Normally, aside from the master arm and the the master arm and the gun arm, there is a weight on wheel switch that disables your weapons if the aircraft detects weight on the wheels to stop you from accidentally shooting or dropping bombs on the ground. Now, why would you need a ground arm in the A-10? Well, technically it's a maintenance function, I would assume, but there are reasons a pilot might need it. This, I believe, all has, well, the volumes are, we'll get to those in a second, but this, the call button, and this puppy right here, which is intercom, FM, VHF, and HF, as well as the hot mic and the volume, has to do with the hand mic. So if you're a maintenance guy and you're talking on the radio, this is all for the hand mic control, but you're not going to be using a hand mic in DCS. Actually, I think you can technically use it if the canopy's open. You can talk to the ground crew with it, but it's all automatic. You don't have to actually fuck with the shit. But, for example, you wanted to talk on the FM radio using the hand mic, you would have it switch to FM, and then you could, if you wanted to have it transmit constantly, you could pull the hot mic out, or press it in, rather, and that's pretty much that. Then you have all of the volumes for the various things, which are pretty much self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into all of them. Like the AIM-9 is obviously the growl of the AIM-9, and that's reducing, and so they're all at maximum by default. Coming up to the manual reversion flight control system, we talked about this being for the roll control only. Emergency flap retract cuts off hydraulic pressure to the flaps. Emergency speed brake retract cuts off speed brake hydraulic pressure. And you've got the emergency aileron disengage, which actually cuts off the two ailerons from each other. So if one gets jammed, you can still use the other one. Same thing with the elevator. I don't think that jammed control surfaces are modeled in DCS, but If you, for some reason, couldn't move your control stick because the left one's jammed, you could shear it to the right, and now the left one will be disconnected, and you can use the right aileron. I might have that backwards, actually. Let me look that up real fast, actually. Yeah, I have it backwards. So if the right one was jammed, you'd flip it to the right to disengage the right one, and then the left one would be free. But again, don't think that is modeled in DCS. You have an override for your trim, pretty self-explanatory, and then this switch right here moves just like the hat switch on your control stick. So that's the manual reversion flight control panel. This puppy is your UHF radio. Selector knob, you're going to put it on main primarily. ADF is for looking at NDBs. You've got manual preset in the ground, which is, guard, which is the guard frequency, 121. Well, actually, I don't know what the guard frequency is. I don't really use UHF in real life, but basically automatically starts transmitting on guard. Squelch is normally for if you have a transmission that's too weak to hear, you could turn it off to hear all of the chatter. I don't think it's modeled in DCS, though. Volume, self-explanatory. These knobs, self-explanatory. They actuate whatever number is under it there. Okay, the ARC 210, that's going to be a subject of its own to go over, so one will cover that right now. Looking at this panel over here is the IFF panel, which is completely non-functional in DCS because IFF is automatic because it's mostly classified. This is called your LASTI, Low Altitude Safety and Targeting Enhancement Control panel. The EAC is your Enhanced Attitude Control, which is basically the bread and butter, the SAS. The radar altimeter, you could just disable it if you'd ever want to disable it. I have no idea why you want to do that. This has the same function as the red button on the throttle to turn on your autopilot on and off. These are your three autopilots. Path is just holds the attitude of the aircraft. Altitude and heading just holds, literally altitude and heading. And then altitude is like good for keeping the aircraft in a racetrack pattern, like a lazy bank, to go back and forth as you are simply looking for targets. That's what I primarily use it for anyhow. SAS panel, like I said, 2 channels for pitch, 2 channels for yaw. And then that's just the test that they cut off normally because they're magnetic switches. Yaw trim, self-explanatory. You shouldn't ever need to use this stuff. In real life, aircraft airframes accumulate a little bit of bend or tweak to them. You might need a little bit of yaw trim to keep her flying straight and level, but this is a simulator, so the aircraft's perfect, so you never need to touch it, basically. Oh yes, takeoff trim. If you, for whatever reason, have a whole bunch of trim in there, you can press and hold that to set takeoff trim automatically, and once you're at takeoff trim, the takeoff trim will pop up. A little light here will pop up as you hold that button down to indicate that you're in acceptable takeoff trim ranges. Flaps, talked about it. Up, maneuver, and full, 0, 7, and 20 degrees. APU on and off, self-explanatory. Friction lock, don't have to really worry about that because it's a real-life thing. Landing gear, warning, silence horn. If you, I've actually done this in real life. If you have a really hard, not real life, but in the simulator, if you tweak your landing gear really, really, really hard, you might bust them, and they might not. They might be in transit, and you'll get a gear unsafe, and it'll go doo 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 doo, and nothing you do silences it. That will silence that. Is how you do that. So this here is temporary and hold. So normal's normal, obviously, for engine start. But if you flip these puppies to motor and then take your engines out of the idle cutoff into the idle position, you'll dry motor the engine, which is used to clear debris and excess gas in the event of a failed start. And then if you needed to manually turn on your igniter plugs, you could hold that to turn on the igniter plugs in the right engine. So that's how those work. Fuel flow, this is an interesting one. So fuel flow, we've got normal and override. Normally the engines are controlled by modulating how much gas gets to the engine, and that's controlled automatically by the A10 systems. But you can override them to manually give as much gas to the engines as manually commanded by the throttle position. So you can actually squeeze a little bit more juice out of the A10 by doing that, but you're probably going to ruin the engine in the process. The couple of times I've done this, I was able to get a little more oomph out of my engine, but it did break them after a while. But if you're like stuck in the mountains and you've got one of your engines shot up and it's still working, but you're getting a reduced output from it, and you're going to fucking crash into the side of a mountain, well, you might as well burn that fucking engine down, bro, because you're going to die anyway. So that's how those work. Night vision lights, which are special lights that only the night vision goggles can see. Refueling indexer lights, weapon status lights, which are not functional in DCS because this is an A10A thing. They just didn't bother pulling the fucking knob out of the aircraft. Test for all the lights in the cockpit, bleed leak to test, and then you can manually switch from SAS to HARS if you had to. But I don't think I've ever done that in the history of flying DCS A10. Okay, the fuel panel. Remember I talked earlier in the fuel systems about, earlier in the video about the fuel system. You can manually turn the pumps off for the wing and the main tanks. You can disable certain fills for certain tanks for being filled. I talked about that. That's how you do that. You basically pull them out to disable them or click them out. I'm not actually sure how it works. If they click out, you got to pull them out. But that's how you would stop disabling putting gas into a fuel tank that maybe has a fucking hole in it. This is how you open the manual refueling door. Fuel line check's non-functional. Signal amplifier switch is non-functional. And the exterior lighting brightness control knob is used for help during air-to-air refueling. Crossfeed allows for the right engine to get gas in the left tank and vice versa. And then the tank gate allows the fuel to flow freely from one tank to the other to balance. I don't know why you'd be out of balance, but that's the thing you can do. And then you can transfer external fuel to the fuselage or to the wings or have it do it sequence automatically, which I believe sequences from center to main and... I'm sorry. Wing tanks to external wing tanks to the internal wing tanks and external fuselage tanks to the main tanks, the two main tanks that are actually in the body of the aircraft, if I'm not mistaken. While we're on the topic, though, real quick, looking at the fuel gauge, you've got the totalizer, and then you've got the actual pointers for the analog. And you've got external center, external wings, the wing tanks, the main tanks, and total internal fuel. When you push the test one when we have actual power to the aircraft, it should indicate 3,900, I think. Seat height moves you up and down when you have power, obviously. This is the HUD tape recording, completely non-functional in DCS. You can just watch your replays. I don't know why you need that in the first place. All right, coming up, the left side of the main instrument panel. Anti-skid, which is magnetic, so it springs to the off position if something interferes with it. Landing light, you've got off, you've got land, you've got taxi. Downlock override is if you're trying to put your gear up and they're locked in the down position because you've got a failure of a weight on wheel sensor, you could manually override that to raise your gear. Yes, you can raise your gear on the ground if you hit that. Wouldn't fucking recommend it. This is a maintenance button. Don't fucking touch it. This is the landing gear handle. It's pretty obvious. We talked about the flaps gauge already. Okay, this panel right here is pretty important. Let's get a better look at it. All right, CICU stands for Central Interface Control Unit, which is like the basic computer that links everything together. So if anything at all goes wrong in the CICU, it's like, I'm head out. It's probably the number one thing that's going to fail when you get shot. The JTRS is the Joint Tactical Radio System. The IFC is the Integrated Flight and Fire Control Power Switch, which is what's going to power the systems that actually show you stuff on your MFDs. HUD mode, day and night. Day and night. I pretty much always keep it on day because the night one just doesn't look good in the night vision. I just turn the brightness down. And then the mode, HUD mode selector, normal standby. You know, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not terribly sure what that actually does, what standby HUD mode does. We'll test it later. And then your altitude source, you've got the baro, and you've got radar, and you've got the difference between the two. Why'd ever want the difference between the two? I have no fucking idea. TGP power switch, if you have a TGP, powers it on. Laser arm, you've got arm, and you've got safe, and then training is like for practice, but basically arm and safe. Master arm, same deal, training, just for training. Safe and arm. Gun arm, I talked about this already. You can arm it to have no pack, you can arm the pack, or you can have it safed up. You know the gun's fucking powerful when you've got a master arm and a gun arm just for the fucking gun itself. Moving on up. MFD, contrast and brightness are the really only two things that I play with. I don't touch the symbology, the DSP, or the adjust buttons. And then this is night and day and off for the overall power to the system itself. External storage jettison, mash that, and you're going to jettison everything except the TGP, the ECM pod, and your AIM-9 Sidewinder. It's basically the two outermost pylons is how that works. Brightness for your RWR. One of these is nose wheel, and one of these is the gun arm light, letting you know your gun's ready. Standby attitude indicator, UHF repeater, digital clock, angle of attack indicator. I really like that we have an angle of attack indicator. It's fucking pimp. Circuit breakers down here. You actually can pull them. I don't know why you'd ever need to pull a circuit breaker in a simulator. Auxiliary landing gear handle. That's how if I talked about if your left system's failed and you need to extend your gear, you'd pull that one to use the right system to unlock everything and let the gear free fall. Pedal adjust. I've actually touched this in real life when I flew the real A10 simulator. Basically pulling that lets these pedals spring load forward and you push them back as far as you need, but obviously it's going to do nothing inside of an actual of a simulator here. UHF, listen to me. UFC, upfront controller. A lot of these actually mimic what the CDU can do, but this is really a subject of its own lesson, so we'll get back into that later. You can actually make the stick disappear, so we'll disappear the stick for a second here. In the old Legacy A10, you had the target set identifier laser thing TISL panel here, which has been removed. Looking at this puppy, though, you've got the source for your navigation. You could HARS, IGI, or TISL, which is gone. You're pretty much always going to be using the IGI, the embedded GPS INS. This is for the ADF, which we don't have any power for right now. And then these are for what you want to be displayed on this puppy right here. Basically, this panel works for this panel here, but the IGI is a little more important because that's going to give you the overall navigation source for the entire aircraft. This thing is an HSI. It's basically your TAD without the moving map. I basically never used it, honestly. I've always had my TAD working. If your TAD's busted and you need to use this, you're having bigger problems. I suppose in real life you could have something fail and need to use it, but inside DCS, you're not really going to be touching it. I'm not going to lie to you. Airspeed, pretty self-explanatory, but the white needle's the current airspeed. The hash needle is your maximum airspeed, and then the rotary drum is the decimals of the main dial. Max speed for gear is 250, and max for flaps is 190. Just keep that in mind. Countermeasures set control. You hit this button to cycle, air-to-air, AAA, SAM1, and SAM2. Jamming's a whole thing we'll go into later. Chaff and flare counter. What program is selected. The letter will be here, and then how many chaff and flare left are total are there. Missile warning will say either active or launch, or if it's degraded or broken or busted, it'll tell you. And then these buttons, toggles between 5 and 6 priority targets. Separation will separate if there's clutter on here. It'll spread them all out so you won't have accurate, what's the word I'm looking for? You won't have accurate cardinal direction for where they're coming from, but it'll allow you to see everything that's looking at you. And there's a display unknown threats button. I'm not sure if that actually works or not. It's your standby attitude. These flags mean it's not working because the aircraft's shut down right now. Turn and slip. If you don't know how a turn and slip works, go watch a short YouTube tutorial on it. It's really basic private pilot 101 stuff. Altimeter works like any other aircraft altimeter. VSI works like any other aircraft VSI. It says feet per minute. You can actually see the lights here. I've never actually seen the marker beacon one, as I never actually shot an ILS in this, honestly. And then if your canopy's not closed and locked, that light will be turned on. We already talked about the fire extinguishing system. This is identical to the other screen. They're interchangeable. Now, these mess of gauges. Now, so with engines, you typically don't look at fuel flow or N2, which you're looking for, or even the temperature. You're looking at fan. Basically, the fan RPM is going to be a accurate measure of how much power the engine's outputting. You've also got the same for your APU over here. And then you've got your oil PSI, and then these are the N2 gauges down here. Okay, moving on to the other side of the aircraft. We've got the hydraulic gauges, talked about that already. We've got our fuel system, talked about that already as well. The countermeasures, off is off, obviously. Standby is provide power. Manual is you select everything. Semi is when something locks on you, it selects the best program possible for you. Auto is it'll actually start dispensing when it determines that is important. Jettisons for jettisoning your countermeasures. I don't know what the fuck you'd ever want to do that. Next and previous is for switching through programs. The turns go to previous program. And there's a way to set all the different programs, which, God, man, off. I haven't changed the countermeasures program in forever. I'm not going to lie to you. Left and right on the CMS on the A10 stick is what I use 99% of the time because I'm a bit of a control freak. But basically just make sure they're all turned on when you do the cold start and you're pretty much good to go. Countermeasures will be its own topic. This is how you open and close the canopy. This is how you jettison the canopy, which I don't know why I'd ever do that. If you're ejecting, you just eject and it's automatic. Boarding ladder, you can press that to extend it, but you're going to have maintenance restow it. Anything that's wrong with your aircraft will be here. This is a good thing to just take a look at when you're done your cold start to see if you miss anything. APU generator, inverter, basically always have it turned on. Floodlight, in case you can't see anything, works even without power. It's powered to the essential, not the essential bus, the hot bus. Battery power, this is where you start your cold start, just provides battery power to the aircraft. And then the inverters for the generators for the engine, which provide AC power, which they're basically always turned on. Moving down here, the CDU. I have an entire, it's actually the most popular video I've ever recorded. My CDU video, go watch that if you want to know how to use the CDU. Oxygen, my guy's actually breathing it right now. You can turn it off and you will become hypoxic at lower altitude. Basically never touch it. You can test it with the, well, you still need power to test it, but it'll actually go all the way around to test. And as you get low, you should start getting a caution warning. Moving along, these switches control power to this system. This turns your CDU on and off, and this turns your embedded GPS INS on and off. Basically, as soon as you have AC power to the aircraft, turn those puppies on. These all correspond to this. The steer point switch, for example, you can actuate steer points with the HOTAS, with this switch, or with the steer point switch on the UFC. This is for anything and everything to do with the ILS. That's how you switch the large number of the ILS frequency. And then left and right clicking is how you turn the power to it on and off. The volume is left and right click as well to turn off the ILS volume to hear if you're hearing the correct identifier. It's in Morse code. And then mouse wheel scrolling is how you change the smaller number of the frequency. Same deal here with the TACAN. For changing TACAN numbers, same deal. I've never used the, actually, now I won't lie to you, I actually have used the TACAN. TACAN's actually quite similar to an ILS. It's kind of like a VOR, but you actually have accurate ranging distance in your HSI when you use it. This is the helmet-mounted sight display. You can actually use it on battery. I don't know why I'd ever do that, though. It's for maintenance function primarily. Just turn it on. That's all there is to it. And then back here is the HARS, which is the old legacy navigation system of the A10A, which I have never used in my life, and it's probably not something you will use ever as well. Canopy defog, not modeled in DCS. Windshield rain remove, not modeled in DCS. Bleed air control, leave it on basically. Windshield defog, de-ice, not modeled in DCS. Pitot tube, pitot heater, actually is modeled in DCS. I have had my pitot tube freeze up. I think in one of the videos I did actually on the Agile Spear, I've actually had my pitot tube ice up and freeze my airspeed. So basically turn it on, leave it on. I recommend it being on at all times. Cabin pressure is, well, cabin pressure, obviously. Cabin air, temperature, all these things are like, well, you're not actually filling the aircraft, so you don't actually have to touch this. You just need to turn on a fan in your room or put on a hoodie if you're cold because you're not sitting in the aircraft in real life. Then back here, all of the lights. Tell you what, let me get into a hot aircraft real fast and we'll fuck with these lights and you can see what they all do. Okay, so imagine the aircraft was completely cold and dark. Emergency floodlights can give you some just light to work with while you do your shit. Now, looking at these lights, these are the external lights. These are, well, for starters, pinky switch. Forward is the default lights. Aft is lights as per this panel. And middle is no lights at all. So you have to make sure you're in the correct light position. So I now have lights as per the panel. So you've got steady, off, and flash. You see they're flashing. You see they're steady. You see they're off. Formation lights are off and now they're on. And then the anti-collision lights are on. Now they're off. So imagine you have all these lights on, you're all lit up like a fucking Christmas tree, because you're just trying to be as high-vis as possible, and you want to go dark because you're about to blow some shit up and not be seen. Middle position turns all your lights off. Forward position gives you default lighting. That's how the external lights work in the A10. It's that simple. Looking at the cockpit lights. Let's see if I can do this here. Oh, that's much better. Okay, so instrument lighting, as you can see. Auxiliary instruments. You can see what those are. Back of the main instruments, or flood instruments, I should say. The floodlight, which I actually hate the fucking floodlight. I usually have it all the way off. And then the console lights, which are the ones that I really like. I like the console lights. This is my shit right here. This is how I like it. So, that's it. God damn, what a fucking video this was. Jesus, man. Okay, well now that we're done all the boring shit, we can finally do some fun stuff in the A10, but, thank you if you watched this video all the way to the end. Thank you for sticking with it. I hope you learned something. Pop quiz, what's on the left hydraulic system? If you answered these things, you're right. What's on the right hydraulic system? Outstanding job. Thanks for watching. I don't give a fuck if you like and subscribe. Next video, we are going to... I have written down for the next video. We're going to do takeoff, basic aircraft handling, and landing. Whew, that'll be some fun. Alright, thank you for watching. Bye.